Imagine a silence so heavy that it becomes a physical weight on your chest. A quietness that isn't peaceful, but expectant, like a held breath that never releases. It is late afternoon, the golden hour that photographers love. But here, inside this sprawling, well-kept house, the light only serves to highlight the dust motes dancing in the air, the only things moving in a room frozen in time. This is not the solitude of a monk seeking enlightenment. It is the involuntary quiet of David, a man who once commanded boardrooms and built skyscrapers, now reduced to the commander of a remote control and a ticking clock. The world outside rushes by with the frantic energy of importance, while in here, time stretches and warps, turning minutes into hours, transforming a simple afternoon into an endless, echoing cavern of memory and waiting. Have you ever felt invisible even when surrounded by people, as if your physical presence has become transparent, a ghost haunting your own life? This specific type of loneliness is not about the absence of bodies in a room. It is about the terrifying realization that your voice no longer carries weight, that your existence has shifted from being a vital engine of society to a sentimental artifact on a shelf. We often mistake this isolation for a simple craving for company, but it is far more complex and devastating than that. It is a profound, silent grief for one's own utility, a mourning process for the person you used to be before the world decided you were finished. You are about to witness the quiet unraveling of a soul who is still very much alive, yet treated as if he has already departed, trapped in the cruelest paradox of modern aging. David is 78 years old, a man whose spine is stiffened not just by age, but by a lifetime of carrying heavy responsibilities as if they were structural beams. He wakes up at 6 in the morning sharp, a biological alarm clock set during decades of catching commuter trains, only to realize for the 1,000th time that there is nowhere left to go. He shaves with meticulous precision and dresses in a crisp button-down shirt and pressed slacks just to sit in his living room, wearing a uniform for a job that no longer exists. His hands, weathered and mapped with prominent ropey veins, once drafted complex blueprints for city infrastructure. Today, their most critical task is carefully measuring the exact amount of ground coffee for a single cup. This ritual is not about hunger or hygiene. It is a desperate structural defense against the chaos of emptiness, a way to prove to the silence that he is still a functioning man with standards, even if there is absolutely no one watching. His home is immaculate, preserving the stillness of a museum exhibit where the velvet ropes are invisible but palpable, separating him from the life that once thrived there. The hallway echoes with the phantom sounds of the past, children running, doors slamming, the beautiful chaos of a family in motion. But now the air is still, illuminated only by the cold, efficient glow of energy-saving bulbs that make his skin look gray. In the living room, surrounded by framed photographs of smiling graduates and distant grandchildren, David performs his most frequent and painful habit. He checks the landline to ensure there is a dial tone. It isn't that he believes the service is down. It is a subtle, heartbreaking need to confirm that the silence is circumstantial, not technical. He lifts the receiver, listens to the steady drone, and places it back gently. The machine works perfectly. It is his relevance to the world that has malfunctioned. He possesses a vast library of wisdom in his mind, encyclopedias of lived experience regarding heartbreak, resilience, and survival. Yet he guards these treasures like shameful secrets rather than gifts. When a neighbor waves from the street, or a delivery driver offers a brief nod, David straightens his posture and offers a curt, strong smile, projecting an impenetrable image of stoic self-sufficiency. He is terrified of becoming the burden, the stereotype of the needy elder who clings to sleeves and traps younger people in unwanted conversation. This fear of being merely tolerated rather than genuinely valued creates a fortress around him. He rehearses casual anecdotes in his head, polishing them to be short and entertaining, stripping away any hint of his true vulnerability. He starves for a real conversation, deep and messy, but settles for the shallow nutrition of polite pleasantries to preserve his dignity, unknowingly digging the moat of his isolation deeper with every refusal to say, "I am lonely." The slow erosion of his self-worth does not happen in a dramatic explosion, but in the quiet humiliation of an empty calendar. David finds himself treating a routine doctor's appointment scheduled for Thursday as the centerpiece of his entire week, preparing for it with the same mental gravity he once applied to shareholder meetings. He chooses his clothes days in advance and rehearses potential topics of conversation, unconsciously viewing the physician not just as a healer of the body, but as a guaranteed audience of one. When the appointment is over in 10 minutes, clinical, efficient, and devoid of personal inquiry, the crash is disproportionate to the event. He returns to his car, gripping the steering wheel, struck by the sudden crushing realization that his most significant interaction of the week was a transaction where he was merely a biological puzzle to be solved, not a person to be known. The tension rises when the telephone finally rings, piercing the silence like a siren, triggering a physical jolt of adrenaline and hope. It is his daughter, calling from the chaos of her own midlife rush, and David immediately adopts his carefully constructed persona of the busy, content retiree. He clears his throat to sound robust, purposely waiting a second or two before answering to avoid seeming desperate. When he tries to share a story about a book he is reading, a genuine attempt to offer something of his inner world, he hears the distracted rhythm of her typing in the background. She interrupts gently but firmly. "That's great, Dad, but I just need to know if you have the spare key." He gives her the information. The line goes dead, and the silence rushes back in, louder and more accusing than before. He holds the phone, realizing he just traded his dignity for a brief moment of utility. Desperate to break the seal of his isolation without burdening his family, David attempts to extract connection from the anonymous world, only to find it sealed off by glass screens and earbuds. He tries to engage the young cashier at the grocery store with a pleasant observation about the weather, a small conversational offering meant to bridge the gap. The boy barely looks up, mumbling a rote response while scanning items with a speed that signals David is merely an obstacle. In the line's efficiency, David fumbles with his wallet, his fingers slightly slower than the machine demands, and he feels the collective impatience of the people queuing behind him, a heavy, hot pressure on his neck. He apologizes for his slowness, retreating into a posture of apology for his very existence. In that moment, the grocery store becomes a courtroom, where he is guilty of the crime of being old and inefficient in a world addicted to speed. This accumulation of small rejections forces a terrifying psychological shift. David begins to question the validity of his own thoughts if there is no one there to verify them. He sits in his armchair as the evening light fades, wondering if a memory is real, if it is never spoken aloud, or if his opinions matter if they simply dissolve into the drywall. The conflict is no longer just about loneliness. It is an ontological crisis, a fear that he is becoming a ghost while his body is still warm. He feels the weight of his own history pressing down on him. Decades of lessons, love, and losses, but without a conduit to pass them on. This wisdom feels less like a treasure, and more like a heavy locked trunk he is forced to drag around an empty room. He is vanishing in plain sight, not because he is dying, but because the world has stopped looking at him. The breaking point arrives on a Sunday afternoon, during a rare family visit that David has mentally choreographed down to the minute. He has spent the last 3 days curating a specific memory to share. A pivotal moment from his engineering days that parallels a challenge his son is currently facing at work. David sees this not just as a story, but as a lifeline, a tangible way to offer value and prove that his experience is still currency in the modern world. As the plates are cleared and a lull settles over the room, David leans forward, his heart hammering with the nervous excitement of a debutante. He catches a breath and begins to speak, his voice animated, his hands illustrating the complex geometry of the problem he once solved. For a brief, shining moment, he feels the intoxicating rush of being the protagonist of his own life again, believing he has finally captured the room's attention. But as he reaches the narrative's crescendo, the delicate spell is shattered by the soft, vibrating hum of a smartphone on the table. His son's eyes dart reflexively to the screen, his thumb sliding across the glass in a practiced, dismissive rhythm, while his daughter-in-law begins stacking dishes, her body language screaming of departure schedules. David freezes mid-sentence, the words dying in his throat like ash. He waits for them to prompt him to finish, to ask, "And then what happened?" But the question never comes. They simply drift into a conversation about traffic and school fees, the white noise of their lives swallowing his story whole. In that suspended second, David realizes with a devastating clarity that, to them, his voice is merely background ambience, a comfortable, low-frequency hum that requires no active listening, only polite tolerance. This silence is the loudest sound he has ever heard, It is the sound of his own obsolescence crashing down around him. He understands now the cruel paradox that has become his cage. His desperate attempt to remain low maintenance and dignified has effectively erased him from their emotional map. By never complaining, never demanding, and never showing the raw, messy edges of his need, he has made it too easy for them to look right through him. He sits there, a statue in his own dining room, screaming internally while smiling externally, realizing that the independence he prized so highly has become his solitary confinement. He isn't protecting them from his burden. He is protecting them from his humanity. The catharsis is bitter and cold. He is not alone because he has no one. He is alone because he has successfully convinced everyone, including himself, that he needs no one. When the front door finally clicks shut, locking out the world and the fading hum of his children's car engine, David does not collapse in tears or throw the china against the wall. Instead, he feels a heavy, hollow exhaustion, the kind that settles deep in the marrow of the bones after a long performance in a play that no one understood. The silence rushes back into the hallway, reclaiming its territory with a vengeance. But this time, David does not fight it with radio noise or busy work. He walks to the table where the half-eaten cake sits, a sugary monument to the disconnect, and simply looks at it without appetite. There is no anger left, only the sobering, dull ache of truth. He realizes that the gap between him and them is not a distance that can be bridged by louder stories or better timing. It is a tectonic shift of eras. He was trying to pay for their attention with currency that is no longer in circulation. He sinks into his armchair, the leather groaning in sympathy, and allows himself to dismantle the courtroom he has built in his mind. For years, he had silently prosecuted them for their negligence, building a case based on his own loneliness. But in this quiet aftermath, the verdict shifts. He remembers, with a sudden and sharp clarity, the way he used to check his watch when his own father spoke of the war, the way he hurried through Sunday visits to get back to his own important life. It is a terrifying grace to realize that his children are not cruel, merely consumed by the blinding urgency of their own existence, just as he once was. He is not the victim of their indifference, but a casualty of the relentless forward-marching nature of time itself. The bitterness evaporates, leaving behind a dry, clean sadness that is easier to carry than the heavy, jagged weight of resentment. There is no grand resolution to this, no sudden phone call that fixes the broken frequency or restores his status as the patriarch. David simply stops waiting for the world to ask him for permission to spin. He watches the streetlights flicker on outside, casting long, stretching shadows across the floor, and decides to stop auditioning for a role he has already lost. He accepts that his social utility has expired, but his existence has not. He finds a strange, quiet dignity in this surrender, a decision to be the silent witness rather than the ignored participant. He is no longer a captain trying to steer a ship from the shore. He is the lighthouse keeper, standing firm in his own solitude, keeping the light on not because someone is looking, but because it is simply who he is. He breathes out, finally letting his shoulders drop, making peace with the invisible man in the mirror. True loneliness, we discover, is not merely the absence of people, but the absence of understanding that every wrinkled hand was once a fist shaking at the world, demanding to be heard. David remains by the window, watching the streetlights ignite one by one, a constellation of small domestic lives unfolding in the distance. He no longer waits for the phone to validate his existence. He understands that his value is not a variable determined by others' busy schedules, but a constant defined by his own endurance. The tragedy of our time is not that we grow old, but that we have forgotten how to harvest the fruit of that aging, treating the elderly like books written in a dead language that we are too impatient to translate. He is not a problem to be solved, but a history to be honored, standing quietly in a world that has lost the patience for stillness. The screen fades not to black, but to the soft, dusty gray of twilight, leaving David as a silhouette against the fading day, a quiet sentinel of a bygone era. The house is still, but the silence is no longer an accusation. It is simply the natural sound of a life that has completed its loudest chapters. As you watch him take a slow, deliberate sip of his tea, the question lingers in the air, heavy and unspoken. Are we too busy building our futures to hold the hands that built our past? The final image is just the landline phone sitting on the side table, silent and expectant, a dormant bridge waiting for someone, perhaps you, to finally cross it before the line goes dead forever.